Hey historians, Mr. Stewart here. Thank you for coming to Mr. Stewart's History Revision channel. And today I'm going to take you through the Abyssinian Crisis and how it became an international crisis. Let's get started. Okay, so the Abyssinian Crisis and how it became an international crisis. It's a key question that may come up in your exam this summer on the AQA exam board. Fingers crossed it does come up because you are right here, right now with Mr. Stewart on this particular topic. Okay, so let's go through our key things that we're going to focus on today. The Abyssinian Crisis breakdown. They're the four key subheadings that we're going to look at. Background to the Abyssinian Crisis and Mussolini's dream. The invasion of Abyssinia. Haile Selassie appeals to the League of Nations and it becomes an international crisis. And the effects of the Abyssinian Crisis itself. Okay? So we're going to start off with the background to the Abyssinian Crisis and Mussolini's dream. So Abyssinia, also known as Ethiopia today, was mainly a Christian country. It was unique because it was one of the last and only countries that escaped being colonized by the European powers. So it was quite a prominent country in Africa. It basically escaped from being invaded by Italy in 1895 to 96, when Italy was trying to expand its empire. Now, this escape from invasion was more of a defeat from the Abyssinians upon the Italians. The Italians took this as an absolute failure and wanted revenge for this defeat. This included the leader of Italy, Mussolini. He wanted to invade Italy again. He wanted to invade Abyssinia again. But this time with the full might of the Italian army. So Abyssinia would have no chance of defeating Italy again. He also wanted what is known as the new Roman Empire. So that image there is Mussolini's dream of restoring the Roman Empire. Mussolini wanted that provenance across that part of the world. He wanted to control the majority of Africa, the Middle East, and the majority of Europe. Not entirely sure how he was hoping to do this, considering some of those nations were quite powerful in their own right, in particular Turkey. So that was his dream. That was what he was hoping to do. In 1936, that was the size of Italy's empire. So it had begun to develop the new Roman Empire. He had begun to develop this new empire, but it's nowhere near what it once was during the Roman Empire. So the invasion of Abyssinia, what actually happened? Basically, the Italians owned the Somaliland and Eritrea. There were two regions in this part of Eastern Africa that they owned. Okay? Now, they wanted to take Abyssinia because they believed it was rich in minerals that they could use themselves. And between the 5th and the 7th of December, there was a skirmish between the garrisons of the Somalians, who were in the Italian service, and a force of armed Ethiopians. The Italians said the Ethiopians attacked the Somalians with rifles and machine gun fire. However, the Ethiopians said the Italians attacked them and were supported by 2 tanks and 3 aircraft. In the end, approximately 107 Ethiopians were killed, so Abyssinians at the time, and 50 Italians and Somalis were killed. Neither side did anything to avoid any confrontation. The Abyssinians repeatedly menaced the Italian garrisons along the border of Abyssinia and Somaliland and Abyssinia and Eritrea, while the Italians sent in planes over the Ethiopian camps. One of them even shot a short machine gun burst, which no one on the ground noticed, after the pilot saw the captain in one of the camps and tried to kill him. That was the beginning of the invasion of Abyssinia. Later, the invasion took a turn for the worse for the Abyssinians themselves. Abyssinia never surrendered to the Italians. In actual fact, the Italians just simply took control of Abyssinia. But they never gained complete control of Abyssinia due to the guerrilla activity of the Abyssinians. Now that means soldiers fighting for themselves against the control of the Italians. So they weren't actually being sanctioned or directed by the Abyssinian government. They were fighting for themselves. That is what guerrilla activity is. And eventually, Italy gained control of 3/4 of the whole country by 1940. So what other reason did Mussolini have for invading Abyssinia, and how did this become an international crisis? Mussolini noticed that there was an Anglo-German naval agreement. Anglo-German naval agreement was an agreement between Britain and Germany. And this agreement was basically that Germany would ensure that they would not have more battleships than Britain. The only issue is, with this Anglo-German naval agreement, it did not include U-boats. It didn't include U-boats, which is really important because this technology is what the Nazis focused on developing, because they knew that with the Anglo-German agreement, they're not going to focus as much on developing battleships because of this agreement. They're going to mainly focus on developing U-boats, which is really important to remember. So, a little bit more detail of the Anglo-German agreement. What was actually agreed on? So, both sides agreed that Germany would ensure they would not have more battleships than Britain. Okay? They would not have more battleships than Britain, which is really important because the British, they wanted complete control of the seas. They needed control of the seas. Even if you've ever heard the saying, Britain rules the waves, that is because the British had an empire and needed a fantastic navy to maintain that empire. And that is why they needed superiority on the seas. Germany would be limited to approximately 35% of the British Navy. So whatever Britain had, Germany would allow 35% of that. Okay? And this was part of appeasement. So appeasement was a policy taken by the British to deal with Italian and German aggression, but mainly German aggression. Okay, before we go off topic, let's get back to the reason why Mussolini one of the reasons why Mussolini wanted to invade Abyssinia. And it is there, right there. He believed that this was a disrespect. The Anglo-German naval agreement was a disrespect on Italy because the British Prime Minister never consulted him. So in turn, Mussolini wanted to show how powerful Italy was and went ahead with invading Abyssinia. He also believed the Anglo-German agreement violated the Stresa front, which was an agreement between Britain, Italy and France to stand together against Germany trying to break the Treaty of Versailles in any way. He believed that Britain was appeasing Germany by signing this agreement, which in turn broke the Treaty of Versailles, because that meant that if Germany were allowed 35% of British Navy, the size of the British Navy, 35% of it, then surely they would be going above the agreed terms of the Treaty of Versailles, which Italy disagreed with. So again, invading Abyssinia. So what was the outcome? The outcome of this new Italian view led to Italy supporting Germany and eventually going on to sign a pact with Germany, known as the Pact of Steel or the Pact of Friendship. In turn, the Abyssinian crisis became an international crisis because it led to Italy joining Germany in its quest for world dominance, which in turn led to the Second World War, which became clearly an international crisis. We're not finished there though. We need to find out a little bit more detail of what the League of Nations did at the time to deal with this Abyssinian crisis. That gentleman there, known as Haile-Selassie, was the Emperor of Abyssinia at the time of invasion by the Italians, also known as the Negus, or in English, King. So after Italy's invasion, the League of Nations declared and condemned Italy as the aggressor and began to initiate sanctions. This was due to Haile-Selassie pleading with the League of Nations to help, and he pleaded with them at the Geneva Conference. And his pleading didn't fall on deaf ears, and that is why they condemned Italy, the aggressor, but they didn't actually initiate sanctions, which means they didn't do anything to Italy. They just said, excuse me, mate, you're a bit too aggressive, and didn't do anything, which is ridiculous. So initially, the League of Nations attempted to stop the flow of all goods to Italy. That was what came afterwards. After they said that they were the aggressor, they thought, look, we better do something. So we're gonna stop the flow of goods to Italy, to slow them down, to make them realise what they're doing is wrong, so that they can stop the invasion of Abyssinia. The sanctions, though, excluded three key things: iron, steel and oil. These three things is what a nation needed at the time and also now for running a war and developing an army. So League of Nations excluded the three key things that allowed Italy to invade Abyssinia and maintain its occupation. So to me, that's a failure in itself. There he is there, Haile-Selassie at the League of Nations in Geneva, giving his speech, pleading with the League of Nations to support Abyssinia against the invasion which was put upon themselves by the Italians. The effects of the Abyssinian crisis on the League of Nations. The Second Italian-Ethiopian War, also known as Abyssinia, showed the League of Nations as an ineffective international justice and peacekeeping body. So they weren't good at keeping peace. They weren't good at stopping other nations from invading other nations. In particular, the more powerful nations such as Italy. Because Italy was a member of the League of Nations, and they can't go against Italy, a member of the League of Nations, one of the more powerful nations, surely. The significant conclusion was that the League of Nations had no weight in the European world. Britain and France feared that further sanction would provoke a full-scale war with Italy. This enabled Mussolini to maintain a supply route to Abyssinia. Britain and France were scared that if they went against Italy further, Italy would, like they did, join up with Germany and move away from the alliance with Britain and France and leave the League of Nations. So they didn't want to completely provoke Italy into doing this. So what did they come up with? The two leading nations, Britain and France, created the Hoare-Laval Pact. This pact was developed by the British Foreign Secretary, Samuel Hoare, and the French Prime Minister, Pierre-Laval, and was created to end the crisis of Abyssinia. It stated that Italy would receive the more fertile and profitable lands in Abyssinia, and Abyssinia would receive the mountainous lands that were not very fertile, didn't have a lot of minerals, and were not very prosperous. In return for this, Italy would need to stand against any German aggression towards the Treaty of Versailles and support Britain and France and remain a key member of the League of Nations. However, this pact was leaked by the press and there was public outrage. The pact was never put in place, and in turn, the hostility towards Italy maintaining its annexation of Abyssinia caused Italy to leave the League of Nations and support Germany in its attempt to put Anschluss in place, which is the uniting of Germany and Austria into one large German-speaking country, which was a clear break of the Treaty of Versailles and a clear indication that Italy had had enough of Britain, had had enough of France, and had enough of the League of Nations. The Abyssinian crisis became an international crisis. Why did it become an international crisis? Because by 1935, the British and French had lost all support of Italy, its strongest ally against Germany. Hitler had gained the support of Mussolini and became more powerful with this support. So what ended up happening is this event became an international crisis because it led to the development of the Second World War, because it led to Germany becoming more powerful with the support of Italy. It led to Germany feeling like there were no sanctions going to be pushed against them if they break the Treaty of Versailles. And it proved that the two strongest countries in the League of Nations were willing to put their own interests before those of the League of Nations. And this was the final blow for the League of Nations, the organisation that was created to maintain peace and to stop invasions. The League of Nations was doomed. Nobody was going to support an organisation that would not be willing to stop one of the more powerful nations from breaking its fundamental policies, in particular the one of invasion. So it became an international crisis because Selassie asked the League of Nations for help. The League of Nations represents the world at the time, where we're supposed to. The League of Nations, in turn taking this on board, made the Abyssinian crisis an international crisis. An international crisis meaning that the League of Nations would have to deal with it and sort the issue out. They didn't do this, which then led to a further international crisis of Germany gaining confidence in breaking the Treaty of Versailles, which led to even further international crisis because Germany united with Italy, which led to an even more important international crisis because Germany believed that they could invade Poland and World War II began, which is the ultimate international crisis. Put simply, the Abyssinian crisis became an international crisis because it led to World War II. The Manchurian crisis of 1931 had severely dented the League's prestige, whereas the Abyssinian crisis provided the death blow to the League of Nations. What followed after this was something known as the policy of appeasement. It had been touched on slightly in the Anglo-German Naval Agreement. In the next video I put up, I will look at the policy of appeasement and the outbreak of the Second World War. Now, before we end, what I need us to do is I need us to look at a very important source that may come up in your exam. So, that source there represents the Abyssinian Crisis. Now, as you can see, the lady to the left is France, the gentleman in the middle is Britain, and the gentleman on the right-hand side is supposed to be representing Italy. Okay? Now, if you look in the gentleman on the right, that is supposed to be Mussolini. And in his hand, he has something that says the Abyssinian Dispute. At the bottom of the source is something known as the provenance of the source. That means, what is it, when was it made, and who made it? So to describe the cartoon, you will need to describe what I just said. To explain what the message of the cartoon is, we need to look in a little bit more detail at the provenance of the source. So as you can see, it says, "We don't want you to fight, but by jingo, if you do, we shall probably issue a joint memorandum suggesting a mild disapproval of you." So that's basically saying that Britain and France, the most powerful countries in the League of Nations, are wagging their finger, telling Italy off, saying, you need to stop what you're doing, and if you carry on doing it, we're going to carry on telling you off and telling you that we don't like it, but we are not going to sanction you. That is what that is saying. And that is what happened in the Abyssinian Crisis. And you know that because that's what we just looked at. And at the bottom, in the provenance of the source, it says, a cartoon from Punch, 1935. Punch was usually very patriotic towards Britain. It seldom criticised British politicians over foreign policy. But this cartoon criticises British politicians. It is going against the League of Nations, this source, because it is highlighting the League of Nations being ineffective in sanctioning and stopping Italy from invading Abyssinia. In particular, the cartoon made by Punch magazine is pointing the finger, excuse the pun, at Britain and France and saying they haven't done enough to stop this invasion. They haven't done enough to stop the League of Nations failing in dealing with this crisis. And that is the overall message of the source. I'm Mr. Stewart. You have just looked at a video about the Abyssinian Crisis and how it became an international crisis. I will be here with a new video looking at appeasement. Good luck with your revision, and I'll speak to you all very soon. Stay safe. Peace.